What it do? Bedtime crew. Hey man, listen, today I was just listening to some unreleased KSI. If anybody wants the link, let me know in the comments down below. But I was thinking I want to do a video talking about UFC fighters that would thrive in different time periods. So we're going to be talking about two fighters from lightweight, welterweight, middleweight, light heavyweight, and heavyweight that I believe you drop them in the 90s, the 2000s, or the 2010s, that they would elevate their career and be a champion or at least a top dog of their division. I'm going to be explaining those as best that I can, but let's get into this. Let's get this absolute garbage off the screen. I'm talking about the MMA video, not the KSI. Starting off in the lightweight division, Benoit Saint-Denis. You drop BSD in the 90s. This guy's putting up Michael Jordan numbers. I'm sorry, dude. You're telling me right now Royce Gracie would know what to do if this guy's walking towards him throwing fucking elbows? No, dude. Benoit Saint-Denis, you drop him in a time period where you don't need to worry about head movement. You don't need to worry about this thing called technique. You don't need to worry about your gas tank. You just need to go at the other guy and know jiu-jitsu better than the other guy who learned it off a fucking VHS tape. Benoit Saint-Denis walks out of that cage every single time. Guaranteed Benoit Saint-Denis, if you drop him in Pride in the 90s, you drop him in early UFC, I believe this guy becomes a champion, dude. I really do. Because you can meme all you want about him. I know that I've made a lot of fun of this guy, and I'm going to continue to do so. But he does have a combat background, you know, and I do believe that his fighting style would have translated a lot better back in the day. I think that his tenacity and his genuinely him being a marauder makes me think he would be a really good fit in like the late 90s, early 2000s MMA. So I feel like Saint-Denis is a very good pick here in the lightweight division. And my other pick for lightweight is Dan Hooker, bro. I'm trying not to glaze the Australians and New Zealanders here, but there's a couple on this list. And I just feel like Dan Hooker fits that shit, bro. He's the throwback fighter. I know he was already around in the 2010s, but I just feel like no weight limit, no time limit, MMA, that is Dan Hooker's jam. You know, like we have videos of this guy fighting heavyweights. We have videos of this guy fighting randoms in a gym, in a shed. You know what I mean? I've seen this guy fight bikers in a fucking shed. So I feel like you throw Dan Hooker in like a Pride tournament, he could probably beat up fucking young Alistair Overeem. You know what I mean? I feel like there's a fighting style of this guy. His chin, his cardio, his power. Dan Hooker is definitely a throwback fighter that I feel like would have thrived very much. So in the 2000s, especially, I feel like that is kind of where he fits because he is skillful. I'm not going to throw him in like only the 90s like I would with Benoit Saint-Denis. I think you throw this dude against some legit people from the 2000s, Dan Hooker probably beats them and becomes a champion. So I feel like that's a pretty solid placement there in the lightweight division. Honorable mention, Beneil Dariush gives me those vibes of like a Strikeforce top lightweight. Like he would be a Strikeforce lightweight champion. You know what I'm saying? Type shit like that. You know, I feel like Benny Dariush, that's kind of where he fits in. He's rolling around in California, you know, beating up Gilbert Melendez for the Strikeforce title. That's kind of where I'd throw Beneil Dariush. But these are my two picks for lightweight. Let's move on to the welterweight division. And one of these I feel very, very strongly about. The other one was kind of the inspiration for this video. All right, dude. First guy I want to talk about, I feel very strongly about this. Stephen Thompson. You throw Stephen Thompson in the 90s, this guy's piecing up Royce Gracie. This guy's front kicking Royce Gracie with a spinning fucking head kick, dude. You're telling me you throw this guy in the cage and some goofy goober wearing one boxing glove. Sorry, I'm not trying to disrespect Art Jimmer, bro. You throw someone in there that's a sumo wrestler that doesn't know how to box in there with Stephen Thompson. See what happens to him, dude. See what fucking happens to him. I think Wonderboy is such a throwback fighter, and he's in an era where predominantly wrestlers and high-level grapplers are the top of the sport, especially in the welterweight division. Only recently we've been kind of changing away from that, but even now, Bilal's the champion. Usman's one of the greatest of the division. Wonderboy it really stands out from that because even when you look at the 2010s, GSP was there, right? Like Johnny Hendricks, guys like that. So I feel like you throw Stephen Thompson in the 2000s, he's still running into Matt Hughes. Yeah, he's definitely a 90s early day UFC champion. That's what I would say for Wonderboy. I think his elite kickboxing, decent takedown defense, and good power, he would be a superstar in the 90s. That's where I'd probably throw him if I wanted to make his career thrive. But I do think he fits that kind of specialist time period a lot more than he does the current day hold against the fence UFC that we're living in currently, you know. And the next guy I want to talk about, I'm not going to go out on a limb and say he would be a champion in the 2010s or he would be a champion in the 2000s, but I think in that time period he would be a beloved top contender like Carlos Condit, Nick Diaz, Robbie Lawler. He would be that type of fighter because he reminds me of those guys now. And I'm not trying to be biased. I'm not trying to glaze. I'm just saying, listen, kid, you throw Jack Della Maddalena in a room with anybody, JDM's walking out, kid. All right? This kid's badass. All right? I'm serious, though, dude. JDM is such a throwback fighter. I fucking love it. He reminds me of, like, Dan Henderson. He reminds me of, like, the old UFC fighters that if this guy wasn't in the UFC, he'd probably be laying fucking bricks right now, dude. He'd probably be building a fucking house right now. Just came in, built the door frame and, left with a pocket full of cash, that's about it. That's what JDM is, man. He probably, he's the type of guy to just get home from a fight with fucking Shavkat Rakhmonov, just sit on the couch and drink a beer. You know what I mean? That's what I love about JDM, and I feel like he would thrive. He would fit right in the prime Strikeforce days in the welterweight division. I think he would be the type of fighter that could beat a Robbie Lawler back in the day, go to war with Nick Diaz, be a tough fight for GSP and Johnny Hendricks, all these guys. He would be the guy that would have slumped John Fitch instead of Johnny Hendricks, dude. So I feel like JDM is definitely a throwback fighter that would thrive even more back then, even though I believe nowadays he still will be a champion because, honestly, when you look at some of these fighters, and there's guys that I'm not going to include in the video, there is guys that kind of have that old school mentality and fighting style that it almost is something new in 2024 because you have people in the division like Leon Edwards, no disrespect, and Ian Gary, who, and Sean O'Malley's another example I can think of right now, of UFC fighters that are in the UFC because they want to be famous. You know what I mean? I wouldn't throw Leon Edwards in there, but Ian Gary and Sean O'Malley, they strike me as guys that treat MMA as a sport. This is a business to them. This is a sport. Whereas I feel like you throw Benoit Saint-Denis, Dan Hooker, JDM out in the street, they're still going to find a way to get in a fight because it's what they do. And for that reason, JDM is one of my throwback fighters for the welterweight division. Let's move on to middleweight. And this guy definitely puts the mid and middleweight. Kevin Holland. I think this guy would fucking thrive back in the day because he's not fighting technical people back then. You throw Kevin Holland in a Pride tournament, he's pulling a fucking, mission control against Rampage Jackson and slapping his ear off and talking shit to him in Pride. I think Kevin Holland would fit right in the craziness of the early 2000s of MMA. And I feel like he's missed out on a good time period that would have suited him so well with the fact that he doesn't really cut weight, the fact that he likes fighting on short notice. He is very skillful off his back. And I feel like you look back at UFC fighters that fought in the 2010s and the 2000s, people used to jump in the fucking guard back then and get submitted. Right? Nowadays, you're an idiot if you jump in the guard, basically, unless you are, Dagestani. But back then, you would still get guys that, would get knocked down and you'd just jump in their guard and get submitted. That's how Kevin Holland wins all his fights. So I feel like you throw Kevin Holland back in the 2000s, you throw him in Pride, this guy could sneakily win, a Pride tournament. Why could I see this guy submitting Chuck Liddell or some shit? Back in the day. So I'm going to say Kevin Holland definitely fits this conversation as a fighter that you could throw back in a past time period, and he would probably do better than he is right now. All right? Unless you throw Roman Dolidze back there, then he's fucked. All right? But next guy to talk about in the middleweight division, I was thinking of doing Roman Dolidze on this list, pause. But, that's kind of boring, That's kind of boring. I was going to throw Jack Hermanson because of his jiu-jitsu, but again, it doesn't really need to be said. I think Paulo Costa is skillful enough to be a champion in the 2000s, but not skillful enough to be a champion right now. I think in the 2010s he would have fit right into that murderer's row of Yoel Romero, Jacare Souza, Luke Rockhold, all those type of guys. He would have fit in as one of those guys. I don't know if he would have been the champion with Robert Whittaker around to school him, but I think definitely in the 2000s, Paulo Costa's physicality and his power and his output, he has sneaky good cardio. His wrestling defense is fucking 99 overall. He is actually really hard to take down. I do like that about Paulo Costa's game. I think he's definitely a fighter that would have done better if he was like born 10 or 15 years earlier. I think he just got here just a second too late, dude. USADA showed up just too fucking early for this guy, and he was like, you know, he was cooked. You know, you throw this guy back when there's no USADA, Paulo Costa's fucking winning a belt. That's all I have to... Dude, you're telling me Paulo Costa on roids is not beating Chael Sonnen and fucking Anderson Silva. I can see it right now. This guy's beating up Tim Kennedy, and Tim Kennedy's complaining about it. He would have been Yoel Romero before Yoel Romero. So I feel like you have to throw Paulo Costa in this conversation when you take into consideration there's no USADA floating around. Like, imagine Michael Bisping trying to fight this guy. Imagine bald... young Bisping trying to fight this guy. Imagine fucking Dan Henderson trying to fight this guy, man. No way. I'm throwing Paulo Costa back into the 2000s. I'm letting him rip, dude. He's winning the belt easily. All right. Let's move on to the light heavyweight division. And honestly, this guy really does give me those vibes. Like, and the thing that reminded me of it was his last fight. Rakic, bro. Rakic is such a Fedor victim. It's actually crazy, bro. When I was watching Rakic versus... I was in the crowd watching Fedor. No, when I was watching Rakic versus Yuri, that whole fight just reminded me of Pride. Like, that fight at UFC 300, I was just watching that the whole time going, dude, this should be in a fucking ring. The way Yuri Prohaska fights as well, he's another option for this video, but I wanted to do non-champions to make it a little bit harder for myself. Rakic really is kind of that old school, nasty, big kickboxer that can also take you down and just lay on you if he needs to. Like, I feel like Rakic would be an Alistair Overeem kind of build back in the day. You know, he would have the similar kind of 2K build to Alistair Overeem if you put him in my player, basically. That's what I'm trying to say. And I think Rakic's kickboxing, his big frame, he's definitely the type of guy that would have been kicking ass back in Pride. Would have came into the UFC and probably slumped some of these dudes on the way out of the light heavyweight division before John Jones got there. Yeah, I think Rakic is definitely the type of light heavyweight that would have been a fucking monster running shit back in the day, because he's so good now, but people genuinely think he's never going to be champion because of the guys that are in this time period. Like, that's how good half of these guys are, that I think you put them back in time, they become champion. And that's the level of MMA is at now. I think Rakic's skills is good today in 2024, but if you throw him back in time, everyone back then, you're cooked. You're done. All right. Next guy to talk about at light heavyweight. This was pretty funny to think about, dude. Azamat Murzakanov. Look at this fucking guy, dude. Look at this guy, dude. He looks like a taxi driver, dude. He looks like Mr. Krabs when he took his shell off. But if you've watched this guy fight, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is the type of bot that will be coming at Fedor full fucking blast, trying to take his head off. This is the type of guy that people will be listing on Fedor's resume as why he's the heavyweight GOAT, you know? And I think Azamat Murzakanov back in the day would have been one of those, like, Igor Vovchanchyn kind of guys, you know? I think he would have been one of those top elite light heavyweights that Joe Rogan would have been mentioning on the podcast back when he had hair. And I feel like Azamat Murzakanov is just a throwback. He's just a rough and tumble Russian, you know, European, I don't know where this guy's from, foreign man with a bald head and a beard. You know, same with like the dude that Ion Cutelaba fought. These are all guys that I look at their picture, I'm like, you should be in 2003 beating up people in Japan. You shouldn't be here on the UFC trying to get promoted on the Instagram. You are from a time period where, you know, fighters got put in magazines or on TV and not on fucking Instagram. That's my personal opinion. I think Azamat Murzakanov is such an old head type of fighter. Like I said, this is the type of guy that gets thrown on fucking Anderson Silva's resume before he got to the UFC, and people are like, wow, dude, Silva's a fucking monster. So Azamat Murzakanov, definitely a big throwback right here. I think he would have thrived back in the day. Same with Krylov. And I will say about light heavyweight before I move on, I considered putting Anthony Smith on this list. I considered it. But then I just started thinking about hypothetical matchups, and I just pictured Anthony Smith. You know, I can just picture Smith going on the MMA Hour in 2005, talking about some random Japanese dude. The guy's just a double threat. The guy's just a complete double threat. The guy just got him, the guy's just got my number. I tried my best. I just didn't feel like myself in there. So I just really feel like there's nothing that I can do to fix Anthony Smith's problem. I can't send this guy back to the 90s, dude. He still would somehow get laid on by the biggest jobber in the fucking UFC 1 tournament and just have 2-on-1 wrist control. Like, I'm sorry, nothing's gonna fix the problems of Anthony Smith. I'm not sending him back to the 2010s. I know he was around in the 2010s. I'm talking Prime Smith. You know, you throw Prime Smith in there with Rumble Johnson, what's he gonna do? Literally, what is he supposed to do against Prime fucking, DC? Imagine what DC would do to Anthony Smith. So I can't throw him in there. These are my picks for light heavyweight. Let's move on to the last two fighters I want to talk about. I feel very strongly about these, dude. I feel very strongly about these two. All right. First one I want to talk about. Sergey Pavlovich. You drop this guy in the 2000s, he's going to fuck around and become heavyweight GOAT. You throw this guy in there with Randy Couture spinning his head around the block, bro. You drop him in there with fucking Prime Andrei Arlovsky. He's done for. You throw him in there with fucking Tim Sylvia. Goodbye, Sylvia. You're done. Right? I wouldn't throw Sergey Pavlovich into the 2010s. I do believe that, like, Cain Velasquez and Fabricio Verdum and Prime Stipe and obviously Prime Alistair Overeem would beat him. But I'm talking straight 2000s, Dark Ages heavyweight. Sergey Pavlovich is the shining light of that division. He's the fucking cornerstone of the division. He saves the company. He's the UFC champion. He has a super fight with Brock Lesnar. Like, I think you drop Sergey Pavlovich in the 2000s, it's wraps for everybody. That's my honest opinion. That's the time period that needs a big, scary Russian man that can box like nobody's business. That boxes like fucking Prime Dustin Poirier in the pocket. All right? So I'm going to throw Sergey Pavlovich back in the 2000s. And this last one, genuinely the most important one to me. This one actually hurts my soul to think about because I know that it's true. Curtis Blades in any other time period is the fucking heavyweight champion right now. 2010s, he's the heavyweight champion. If DC never fought Stipe and this guy got to fight Stipe instead when he won a title shot by KOing Alistair Overeem, he becomes champion. 2000s, who's stopping him? Who's stopping Curtis Blades in the 2000s? 90s, don't even say it. Don't even say anything to me, dude. What, Tank Abbott's gonna beat him? No, dude. Curtis Blades is the heavyweight champion in literally any other era of UFC history. And I wish that EA would add errors to the video game, but they're too lazy to fucking do that. So I could prove my point, dude. I wish EA would add like 90s mode or 2000s mode and let me drop Curtis Blades back then. And just make this dude the fucking heavyweight GOAT, which he would be in literally any other time period. Unfortunately, he exists at the same time as Shamil the Blob Gut. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, but that's my opinion on these picks. Let me know what you think down below, though, man. What fighter do you think would absolutely thrive if you drop them into a different time period? And let me ask you this as well. What fighters from the past do you think would absolutely thrive today in the modern UFC that maybe didn't get a chance to back in the day? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like. Subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be doing my Royval versus Tyra predictions tomorrow. So we will be getting off the UFC.com website. Don't worry, guys. And yeah, make sure you stay tuned for that. Drop a like I said. Subscribe. Go follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Bedtime MMA. I will see you guys in the next video, man. Goodbye.